esteemed leader has been asking me for a joke about documentary makers for some long time, and I couldn't think of one, but I thought of one. And he likes how many does it take to light a light bulb. So how many?
Screw one in.
Oh, screw one in. Yeah, okay, all right. So how many documentary makers does it take to screw a light bulb in? And my answer to that is it depends on who gets the access to the bulb first. I could also talk about him, who gets the bulb to sign a piece of paper at the release first. But I'll leave that to him. He can have that one at the end. Okay, but that's yeah, I've got rid of that. My goodness, like taking a large anyway. I'm really pleased to introduce Simon Chinn because, you know, Laura Agnew, who was a student of mine 10 years ago, came with this idea of doing the clinic, and I wasn't exactly skeptical, because I'm not skeptical of her, but I wasn't totally sure it would be successful. It has been successful, and she described it as, you know, she described Simon's story he's going to tell tonight as a filmmaking fairy story, and it is. And in a sense, what she's trying to do is to create more fairy stories, you know, and that's a hugely admirable ambition. It's also very much the way in which documentary makers are going to have to function in the future. They're not going to be protected by television companies and so on. They're going to have to do the kinds of things that Simon's now going to describe. So I just want to get him to describe them, really. So, what was your first contact with Malik?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think just to kind of to start, I should just say that it's not my fairy story. I mean, I was on for this incredible journey, and it really truly was incredible. But it's Malik's fairy story, and in a way, it's a shame he can't be here tonight. He was going to come, but unfortunately, his girlfriend, he lives in New York now, got ill, so she's okay, but he had to cancel, which is a shame because I was going to have a lot of dinner with him. And my first contact with Malik was about a year before we took the film to Sundance. And basically he'd been working on the film for some time, about 2-3 years, probably more like 3. And he had never made a film longer than 6 minutes. He's Swedish, despite his name. He's of Algerian origin. And he worked on a Swedish arts program, Swedish television, and had sort of been traveling the world looking for stories for this Swedish arts program to make 6-minute pieces. And in South Africa, he'd come across Stephen Sugar Seegerman, who is the first person you meet in Searching for Sugar Man. Stephen had Sugar, as he's known, had told him this story, and Malik was convinced that this was the greatest story he had ever heard, and started making his 6-minute film, and very quickly realized that this was not a 6-minute film. It was a feature doc, and went about trying to raise some funding, which he did. He hooked up with a producer, a Swedish producer at the time, and they managed to sort of cobble together a bit of sort of seed money, with which Malik basically went and shot some material, interviews with many of the key protagonists, finally managed to get access to Rodriguez, who was very reluctant initially, and shot some material with him, and then quickly ran out of money and fell out very badly with his producer. So when I kind of came across him, actually he literally cold called me. He cold called my office and spoke to the receptionist. Weirdly, I never got this message, but he said, apparently he tells me, he said, I have a story that's better than Man on Wire. I need 2 minutes on the phone. And I didn't get that message, whether I had been inclined to say, cool, I don't know.
If you had, would you respond?
Yeah, I'm sure I would. How could I not? In any event, he emailed me, I think a couple of weeks later, kind of pitched me the story in a couple of lines. It seemed intriguing, so he happened to be coming through London on his way back from doing some shooting in America, and you know, literally the day after the email, I saw him. So he came to my office, and he sort of bounced in, you know, a bit like sort of Tigger from, you know, from Pooh Bear, and with this kind of incredible sort of infectious charm. You know, he's got this sort of wonderful, sort of almost childlike kind of enthusiasm. It's like he's like kind of puppy dog, and he, you know, sat there, and I was, yeah, I'm pretty, a little skeptical. So he was sitting there telling me it's the greatest story ever, and blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. And I definitely wanted to spend time with him, you know, which is kind of fundamental really if you're going to produce someone's film. But he left.
That's
me
the first lesson for emerging filmmakers.
Yeah.
You want to get the producer to feel they want to spend time with you.
It's hard work. It's always hard work. So he left me with two things: a rough cut, and Rodriguez's 2 albums.
Right.
And I, you know, when I finally kind of got around to watching the rough cut about a week later, you know, I had that kind of moment, which you kind of have. The hairs just stood on the back of my neck, and you know, I got goosebumps, and you know, it was a rough diamond in a way. I felt, you know, it was sort of the structure that you sort of see in the film was there or thereabouts. You know, he clearly worked very hard on it. You know, needed work, it needed polish. I couldn't really understand why all the financiers, you know, he'd gone back to, had given him seed money, turned him down, because that's basically what happened. You know, he went back to these financiers and they said they didn't think it warranted a feature doc. Okay. You should do it as a sort of half-hour television doc. Right. And I couldn't really.
Were they television people? Or people?
No, I think it was the Swedish Film Institute.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You know, others. In the end, we persuaded those people to give us money and to help us complete the film. So yeah, I mean, that was, you know, that's the brief story.
Amazing.
But I should sort of point out that when I first saw it, you know, it wasn't to me. It's sort of amazing to me now that we're all sort of here talking about it, because you know, it was in many ways a little film, an amazing story. You know, and a real sort of passion project, and it had huge kind of heart and kind of commitment about it. But you know, a film about a musician, an obscure musician that no one's heard of, you know, who was rumoured to have killed himself on stage. I mean, it didn't feel like a particularly marketable proposition. And you know, a lot of the kind of sales agents I was talking to at the time were very nervous, and I got a number of rejections. In fact, I saw one of the guys earlier today who rejected it. He didn't like being reminded of that fact. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't that kind of shoe-in as a film. But you know, there was the kind of idea in my mind, the dream scenario that if we could kind of take this film, if we could finish it in the right way, you know, get it to Sundance, you know, get it a prominent screening at Sundance, and end up opening a festival because they loved it. Get Rodriguez there, get some spring in from the crowd, you know, at the end, you know, and get him to play a gig at the Q&A. Yeah. You know, that would be amazing. And he did that, all happen, and then Sony Classics, who are, you know, without doubt the perfect distributor for this film, ended up buying it immediately after that screening, and everything else is sort of history. And I have to give them huge, huge credit for believing in the film and supporting it, because it did not open fantastically well. I mean, actually, it had the kind of opening where you kind of think, we are maybe not dead, but we're wounded, you know.
At Sundance?
No, I'm talking about its commercial release in the US. You know, and it's all about the screen average on the opening weekend. You know, I've been there before. You know, had successes and failures, and usually that number tells you a lot. But Sony Classics, you know, in their wisdom and you know, incredible distributors, really kind of believed in it and supported it and got us out of the hole. And the film ended up becoming a great sort of box office hit for a doc in the US, and I give Sony really most of the credit for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a fairy story, but in a sense, documentary makers have now got to live with their fairy story. They've got to believe in their fairy stories, and they've got to find people like you who are prepared to believe in them as well. You know, because I'm thinking if he'd taken that to his Swedish television people or to television people here, I mean, the first response would have been no. The second response, well, we'll get somebody good to make the film, you know, that kind of thing. And of course, with my students, it's the same kind of thing. They're newcomers, they're tyros, they are not established and that sort of thing. And they need the kind of allies that you obviously were prepared to be in this case. And it's a hugely valuable story. I mean, it's great.
The other thing I think is worth saying is that Malik, you know, just simply would not be deterred. There was a kind of, I think, a point where he started to kind of believe in the film, you know, that he was making, and believe in his own kind of ability to get there.
Right.
And he just would not give up. I mean, yes, I think he needed help. I think the reason he came to me was because he felt that Man on Wire was a film that had kind of done an amazing story justice. And so,
yeah.
You know, I think he felt definitely wanted a creative collaborator as well as money. But the impressive thing about him was that he basically at a certain point started to think that having no money was actually an advantage for him, and that he would basically learn to cut himself on Final Cut Pro. He would buy, and which he did, he bought a kind of cheap composing software. He scored the film.
He'd been shooting on his phone.
He bought an app, the kind of Super 8 app on his mobile iPhone, and started to shoot with some of the reenactments you see. Reenactments is a rather grand word for them, but at the beginning of the film, done that way. All the illustrations in the film, the kind of animatics, he did himself. The opening credits. It's, you know, it's kind of remarkable, and you know, kind of, I think a real inspiration for emerging filmmaking.
It certainly is an inspiration. We have to stop. Thank you, Simon, for coming. And you know, it's a story that everybody needs to hear, and particularly the young filmmakers in the audience. Thanks.